The storm had been building for hours, driving the sea into black walls that hammered the cliffs. Each impact sent a vibration through the stone, a deep tremor that carried up into Talia's prone body as she crawled toward her chosen nest. She moved low, her weight distributed carefully, boots sliding over wet rock that shone under erratic flashes of lightning. Salt spray coated her lips, clung to her eyelashes, and seeped through the seams of her cloak until every layer of clothing was sodden and heavy. When she reached the hollow carved into the cliffside, she pressed herself flat, letting the storm disguise her movement. The gilly cloak wrapped around her like seaweed, its fabric tugged and whipped by the wind until it seemed ready to rip away. She pressed it tighter against her frame and felt the weight of it drag her lower into the earth. It was camouflage, but fragile, only as strong as her stillness. Her sniper rifle was cradled close, metal cold against her gloves. She slid it forward, laying it across a flat shelf of rock, and adjusted the bipod until it bit into mud softened by constant rain. Water slicked across the stock, over the scope, across the bolt. The weapon felt less like a tool of control and more like another object at the mercy of the gale. She wiped the scope lens with a slow, steady motion, though within moments fresh drops streaked across the glass. The world narrowed to the chamber of her scope. Beyond the blur of water, the horizon heaved in restless swells, waves detonating against the cliffs far below. Thunder rolled in intervals, each crack of sound muffled by the roar of the sea and the constant hiss of rain. The air smelled of brine, wet stone, and the metallic tang of lightning split through clouds. Every sense was occupied, filled, drowned by the storm's presence. She adjusted her position, elbows digging into mud that shifted under her weight. Each movement required control. The ground wanted to pull her down, the wind wanted to lift her away, and she was forced to balance between the two. Breathing became a conscious act, in through her nose, out through her mouth, steady and slow. The storm pressed on her chest as though it meant to smother her, but she would not let it. For Talia, this was more than waiting. It was survival inside a hostile world that refused to yield. She knew her fragility against the elements. Every inch of gear she carried was fighting to fail. Her cloak soaked heavy, her rifle threatened by grit and water, her scope distorted by each raindrop. The storm did not care if she lived or drowned, but her task demanded endurance. That was all she could control. She thought of the lessons that had been carved into her during training. Patience above impulse, breath above panic. Nature cannot be defeated, only endured. She repeated them silently, not as comfort, but as law. Her body obeyed, sinking into stillness, letting the storm scream and lash while she remained fixed in place. The minutes blurred into the rhythm of wind and wave. Raindrops struck her hood, rolled down into her sightline, blurred the glass again. She wiped it once more, careful, unhurried, and returned her gaze to the shifting darkness beyond. Each breath was matched to the storm's pulse, each blink to the lightning flash, each tightening of her grip to the thunder's roll. She was not fighting. She was existing within. Then the storm shifted, and through the veil of rain she saw it, a flicker of movement on the cliffs beyond, faint and uncertain, yet undeniable, a shape against the chaos. Her eye pressed harder to the scope, straining through the blur, her body locked motionless against the earth. The storm had offered her first sign of the enemy, and she understood at once that this night was only beginning. The mission had looked clean in the briefing room, a line on a map, a circle drawn in red grease pencil to mark the cliffs, and a simple command: stop the scouts, deny them a chance to chart marine positions inland. On paper it was geometry, terrain reduced to angles and sight lines. The cliffs were a neat contour, the approach a clear field of fire. She had nodded, understood, accepted. Out here, the storm had torn that neatness apart. The rocks beneath her had turned to slick mud, channels of runoff cut between jagged stones, water pouring down toward the sea. Every patch of ground shifted under her weight, and each gust of wind forced her to pin herself deeper against the slope. The cliffs on the map had been stable, reliable. The cliffs beneath her were alive, crumbling, fighting against her presence. Her task was overwatch. She commanded the only vantage point covering the approach. If the scouts marked this route, the inland positions would be compromised. It was a duty as clear as any she had carried. She thought of the rifle as an extension of that duty, a way to intercept the unseen before it could spread. But duty and execution were not the same when the storm clawed at every movement. She wiped her scope again and tried to remember the training halls. The air had been dry, the ranges controlled. Instructors barked maxims that were meant to outlive the classroom. The shot belongs to the wind. Patience kills faster than haste. The storm is a partner if you listen. She repeated the words silently, as though the memory of the voices could anchor her against the gale's fury. She pictured the briefing map again, its paper smooth and clean. Lines of contour had suggested steadiness. She could almost see her own fingerprint pressed into the margin where she had held it flat. Now the rain had erased all such certainty. The cliffs were a blur of water and shadow, the ground unstable, and the sky pouring weight onto her body. The map was truth only an abstraction. The storm had its own map, one that shifted every second. Her cloak dragged her down. It had seemed like armor when she first wrapped it around her body, a shield against detection. Now it was another weight, pulling her lower, soaking through her bones. She thought again of her instructors, reminding her that patience was more than waiting. It was the art of letting discomfort pass without movement. Endurance was part of the weapon. Thunder cracked again, close enough to rattle her teeth. She steadied her breath, let the sound pass through her instead of flinching. The storm was not simply around her. It was inside her lungs, her ears, her skin. Fighting it was pointless. She had to yield to it, to understand its rhythm, to let her actions fall into its timing. The scouts were her assignment, but as she pressed lower into the mud, as her scope blurred again with water, she knew the truth. The storm was her real enemy. To complete her mission, she would first have to survive it. Through the scope, the shape flickered in and out of the storm. At first it was only a blur, a darker patch against the shifting gray. But as she steadied her breath, the outline of a figure began to form. Talia adjusted the focus knob with deliberate care. The motion slowed by wet gloves. The image sharpened, but only briefly before raindrops streaked down the glass and fractured the view into shifting arcs of light and shadow. She wiped the lens with her sleeve, yet the clarity never lasted. Water reappeared instantly, streaming across the surface. The figure in her sight moved again, though distance and weather distorted every detail. The storm wanted to erase truth, to reduce the world to confusion. She exhaled slowly, let the crosshairs settle, and tried to calculate the shot. The wind broke those calculations apart. Gusts came in bursts, each one stronger than the last, tearing through her cloak and pushing her body sideways. She tried to account for drift, turning the turret and measuring holdover, but each correction was undone within seconds. The crosshairs jerked away from their mark as though the storm itself swatted her weapon aside. She held her breath, waited for a lull, then found the figure again. Before she could fire, another blast slammed into her, and the shot dissolved in her chest before it ever left the barrel. Mud shifted under her elbows. She pressed harder into the slope, forcing her arms steady, but water pulled the ground away in trickles and slides. The rifle rocked with each movement, threatening to betray her position. She corrected again, teeth clenched, frustration flickering before discipline pulled it back. This was not about rage. Rage meant mistakes. The figure remained in her scope, still within reach, still tempting. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, settled lightly on the steel. Every instinct demanded release. Yet the voice in her head was louder, Wait. The storm owns the shot. She repeated it, a mantra carved into her during training, words that rose above impulse. The rifle was ready, but readiness was nothing if the world around her denied it. Salt spray stung her lips, sharp and metallic, and filled her mouth with the taste of iron. Lightning flared across the horizon, whitening the scope for an instant before fading. She blinked against the afterimage and found the figure still there, distorted by fresh sheets of rain. Each second lengthened, stretched taut by her own restraint. Every muscle ached with the desire to end it, but patience was its own weapon. Her breathing became the rhythm she could trust, in through the nose, out through the mouth, steady against the howl of wind. She let her heartbeat slow, let the world narrow to the moment between gusts. The figure blurred and reformed, blurred again. She knew that if she fired now, the storm would claim the bullet, throw it wide, and waste her position. It would not be her skill that decided, but the weather itself. Thunder rolled again, deep and shaking, a sound that merged with the roar of waves below. She felt the vibration through her chest, as though the earth itself commanded her to hold. The rifle was not hers to use until the storm allowed it. That truth settled into her, cold and absolute. She lifted her finger from the trigger, exhaled once more, and lowered the weapon into the mud. The figure vanished into rain, consumed by distance and weather. Her first battle of the night had ended without a shot. The storm had claimed the field, and she knew with certainty that it would decide every engagement to come. Shapes moved in the storm, shadows bending and breaking against the cliff path. At first Talia thought the rain was playing tricks again, but then the silhouettes separated, distinct against the curtain of gray. They were men, their bodies hunched low against the gale. Rifles clutched tight, heads bowed. The enemy scouts had come into her field, ghosts half swallowed by the weather, yet solid enough to threaten. She settled behind her rifle and tracked them, letting the crosshairs sweep from one figure to the next. Every adjustment of the scope felt temporary. Raindrops streaked the lens and distorted their forms. One moment the reticle hovered over a chest, the next it drifted into fog. She worked the knob, wiped with her sleeve, corrected again, but clarity never held. The men moved slowly, stopping often as if wary of hidden watchers. Their boots slipped on wet stone, their outlines bending with each gust of wind. She tried to predict their course, but the storm shifted visibility too quickly. The cliffs dissolved into mist, reappeared and vanished again. She adjusted her hold, calculating drift, but the wind tore through her numbers before she could finish. Confidence in a clean shot never came. Her breath slowed into deliberate cadence. The rifle was steady against her shoulder, but her finger hovered outside the guard. Instinct wanted release. Logic told her to wait. Each second dragged. Her body tensed between action and restraint. She imagined the shot breaking, the storm curving it wide, the scouts alerted, their eyes sweeping until they fixed on her position. That outcome was worse than waiting. The patrol kept advancing, their outlines growing sharper as they neared. One broke from the line, turning toward the rocks below her perch. At first she thought he sought shelter from the wind, but then she saw him climb, hand over hand, slipping across wet stone as he angled closer to her cliff. Her pulse quickened. She tracked him through the scope, breath caught in her throat. The crosshairs steadied on his helmet, then jerked aside as another gust shoved the barrel. She corrected, forced her body flat, forced her elbows deeper into mud that oozed under her. The scout climbed higher, closer. Each movement carried him toward her concealment. Her finger tightened on the trigger, ready for release. The wind screamed again. Raindrops blurred her sight picture until the man dissolved into streaks of gray. She blinked, wiped the lens, found him again, now nearer than before. He was no more than a dozen meters below, boots scraping against stone, shoulders rising as he hauled himself upward. The storm masked the sound, but in her scope she felt every movement as a vibration. Her breathing came in shallow draws. The decision loomed: kill or let him pass. She knew that firing risked failure. A miss in this weather would mean discovery. The others would fan out, search the cliffs, find her before she could relocate. Yet letting him pass meant gambling with her life. If he reached too high, if his eyes swept the slope, he would see the outline of her cloak against mud. The trigger was cold beneath her finger. She felt the weight of it as more than steel. It was choice, survival, exposure. She pressed lightly, not enough to break, just enough to feel the threshold. The storm hissed in her ears. Wait. The words echoed again. Patience kills faster than haste. She forced her breathing to slow. Let the moment stretch. The scout paused on a ledge, head turning. For an instant she thought he had seen her. Her muscles locked, her eye pressed tight to the scope. Rain streaked the glass again, blinding her, and she could not tell if his gaze was on her or away. Seconds dragged like hours. Her body burned with the demand to fire, to end the risk. She held. The man shifted, lowered his head, and began climbing again. Slowly he moved past, one hand reaching higher, one foot dragging upward. He pulled himself over the ridge, vanishing into the haze beyond her sight. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the earth might feel it. She stayed motionless, frozen, in mud, waiting for alarm that never came. The patrol continued on the path, their figures stretched into thin smears of gray before dissolving entirely into the storm. She did not relax. She let her body remain pressed into the ground, her cloak plastered to her frame. The rain masked every sound but her own breathing, which she forced a steady rhythm again. Restraint had saved her. She knew that firing would have betrayed her, but still the decision left her drained. Patience had been her weapon, silence her shield. The storm owned the field, and she had survived by surrendering to it. The storm deepened until it felt alive. Rain no longer fell in drops but slashed sideways, each gust carrying sheets of water that struck her like handfuls of gravel. The wind howled across the cliffs in long, hungry tones, as if the sea itself had become a predator, circling its prey. Talia pressed lower into the mud, her body half buried, while the storm raged above her. The earth itself betrayed her. Runoff carved trenches beneath her arms, pulling soil away and forcing her to shift again and again. Every adjustment risked noise, but without it she would slide down the slope and crash into the rocks below. The cliff face that had seemed solid on the map was nothing but crumbling earth under pressure. She dug her elbows in, grinding them against stone, willing herself to be part of the cliff rather than a body clinging to it. Her rifle grew heavier with every minute. Rain slicked the stock, filled the grooves, and coated the scope until it became another surface for water to claim. She pulled the bolt back and felt it grind with grit. Mud had already worked its way into the chamber. She cleaned it with her glove, slow and careful, knowing that speed would only push more dirt inside. Each small motion felt like defiance against the storm's attempt to strip her of tools. The cloak clung tighter. It no longer served as camouflage, but as weight dragging her lower. The fabric plastered itself against her spine and shoulders until she felt she might sink into the ground itself. Every gust tugged at it, threatening to pull it free. Yet, every ounce of water trapped inside made it heavier, impossible to shake away. It was as if the storm wanted her buried. Waves detonated against the cliffs below. The impact was not sound alone, but a force that climbed through the stone into her chest. Each crash echoed like distant artillery, timed irregularly, yet steady enough to shape a rhythm. She began to notice it, to match her breathing to the booms. In through the nose as the water receded, out through the mouth as the waves struck again. Slowly her pulse aligned with the sea's relentless pace. The wind, too, carried a rhythm, It did not rage without order. There were moments when its scream peaked, tearing at her cloak, and moments when it eased, replaced by the hiss of rain. Between the peaks lay silence, brief but real, a pocket in which her rifle could hold steady. She began to listen for those moments, to time her adjustments to their return. Her body shifted with the storm's breath instead of against it. Her scope fogged again. She wiped it once more, though she knew the clarity would never last. This time she did not curse it. Instead, she waited, listening to the rhythm of wind, letting the lull return before she moved her sleeve across the glass. When she lifted her head again, the view was momentarily clear. The storm gave her vision, then took it away. It was not chance. It was pattern. The longer she watched, the more she saw its design. Rain struck in waves, not constant but pulsing. Wind gusted in cycles, each surge followed by quiet. Even the thunder carried intervals, rolling with the waves rather than against them. The storm was not chaos. It was alive, breathing, moving with intent. She had thought of it as an enemy, but now it seemed more like a partner whose timing had to be respected. She shifted her rifle again, this time moving only when the gust softened. The barrel settled without the usual jerk. She steadied her cheek against the stock, waited for the next lull, and wiped the lens. For 3 full seconds the scope remained clear, the reticle firm on the empty horizon. It was enough to prove her realization true. The storm wanted her to fight it. Every instinct in her body demanded resistance, but resistance had drained her strength and threatened her mission. Surrendering to its pattern gave her steadiness. She thought again of training. The storm is a partner if you listen. The words had once felt abstract, something repeated in classrooms. Here, soaked and half buried in mud, they had become law. She pressed her body flatter into the ground, let the cloak press heavy across her, and listened. The storm was no longer just noise. It was a heartbeat, a pulse, a rhythm that could be read. She matched her breath to it, matched her patience to its timing, and felt the weight of frustration begin to lift. The predator still circled, but now she was learning its path. She was not beating it. She never could. What she could do was exist inside its rhythm, moving only when it allowed, stilling when it commanded. Patience was survival. Endurance was mastery. Talia closed her eyes for one long breath, then opened them to the storm again. The sea hammered the cliffs. The wind screamed across stone. But she no longer felt herself its victim. She was its shadow, bound to its movement. The storm had ceased to be her adversary alone. It was now her partner. And through it, she would survive. The scouts reappeared below, huddling against a jut of stone that offered brief relief from the gale. They crouched low, shoulders pressed together, rifles slung but ready. The storm drove rain sideways into their faces, yet the ledge gave them shelter enough to pause. Talia watched them gather. Bodies clustered in the half-light, their outlines blurred but close enough for her scope to hold steady. Her breath slowed. This was the chance. They had stopped in the open, unaware of her position high above, yet the storm remained between her and the kill. Wind gusted across the barrel, tugged the cloak around her shoulders, shifted her hold. A shot now might strike true, or vanish into the weather and betray her. She steadied her cheek against the stock. The crosshairs slid across one chest, then another, never still for long. She did not curse the storm this time. She listened for it, waited for its cycle to return. The gale screamed, peaked, then softened. Her lungs filled during the scream, emptied during the lull. She matched her pulse to the rhythm, her finger resting against the cold trigger. When the next lull came, she pressed. The rifle bucked, the sound lost in thunder. For a fraction of a second the world stilled, and then one figure below crumpled sideways, his body sliding into the mud. The others froze. Confusion rippled through them, heads snapping in every direction. They could not hear the shot. They could not know where it had come from. Panic broke their cluster. Two dragged the fallen man deeper into the shelter. Another scrambled across the ledge, searching upward. Their movements turned frantic, spurred more by the storm than by sight. Talia cycled the bolt slowly, the grind of grit muffled by the wind. She did not fire again. She had learned that victory was not in volume but in timing. The scouts shouted, their voices half lost to the storm. She could not understand their words, only the cadence of fear inside them. One pointed toward the cliffs, another toward the sea. They did not agree. The storm had stolen clarity from them, as it had once stolen it from her. Now, it was her weapon. She stayed motionless. Every nerve wanted to fire again, to cut their numbers further, but discipline held her still. She could feel the storm tugging at her cloak, pulling at her body, urging her to vanish into its rhythm. The trigger lay under her finger, heavy with possibility, yet she knew restraint was stronger than release. Below, one scout broke from the group. He began climbing, hand over hand, his boots slipping against stone polished slick by rain. Talia tracked him through the scope, her breath shallow. He was climbing directly toward her ledge, though perhaps he did not know it. Instinct screamed to fire before he reached too close, but the storm offered no lull. Gusts battered the barrel, shoved the reticle wide. A miss would bring the others. She froze, her cheek pressed into the stock, her elbows deep in mud, her body as still as stone. The scout climbed higher, face slick with rain, eyes narrowed against the storm. At one moment he was close enough that she saw water running off his helmet, droplets breaking into lines. She did not breathe. The cloak plastered against her body, fabric merging with earth, every thread drowned in mud. She was no longer separate from the cliff. She was part of it. The scout paused, scanning the slope, his head turned, gaze sweeping. Talia kept her eye to the scope, though it showed nothing but blurred lines of water. She could not risk movement. Every muscle ached from stillness, but she did not yield. The storm shrieked overhead, covering the sound of her heartbeat. At last the scout shifted, hauling himself higher, climbing past her without pause. His boots scraped rock only meters away, but his eyes never caught her. He pulled himself over the ridge, disappearing into the storm above. Relief did not come. Only silence, thick and heavy, broken by the roar of the sea. The rest of the patrol had scattered, their movements frantic in the haze. Some pressed back into shelter, others moved down the path, searching for cover. None fired a shot. They could not find what had struck them. To them, the storm itself had delivered death, invisible and unstoppable. Talia let the rifle settle into the mud again. She did not rise. She did not follow with another round. One had been enough. The panic it seeded was stronger than a volley. The storm masked her, hid her, made her untouchable so long as she moved with it. Patience was the sharper weapon. She let her breath return to rhythm, in with the scream of wind, out with the lull. The storm's heartbeat had become her own. Through it, she had struck. Through it, she had endured. And through it, she remained unseen. The scouts below regrouped only to stumble again. Their order shattered. Fear carried them away more effectively than any second bullet. They retreated into the haze, their outlines fading until only the rain remained. Talia held her position, body fused to earth, cloak heavy with water, rifle resting silent. The storm raged on, indifferent, yet within its violence she had found her place. She was no longer separate from it. She was part of its will. The scouts were gone, beaten not by her alone but by the storm she had bent to her side. Their confusion was her victory. Their retreat was her survival. She did not smile, did not celebrate. She remained still, a shadow in mud and stone, waiting for the storm's next command. The storm had scattered most of the patrol, But one figure returned. The lone scout emerged from the haze, climbing higher with grim determination. He did not falter at the rain or pause at the wind. His boots scraped against rock as he pulled himself up the cliff. Closer, with each movement. Talia watched him through the scope, body flat against the mud. He was climbing toward her ledge, whether by chance or by suspicion she could not tell. Distance closed fast. She could not let him crest above her. Silence had worked before, but silence would not save her now. Her breathing slowed. The crosshairs followed him, rising and falling as the wind shoved her rifle. She did not curse the storm. She listened to it, waited for its rhythm. The gusts surged, then softened, each lull brief but real. She matched her breath to those gaps, her pulse syncing with the storm's cycle. Lightning split the sky. The flash lit the scout's helmet for an instant, gleaming silver against the black rock. Thunder followed, booming deep through the cliffs. The storm gave her cover, its voice louder than any rifle. She adjusted her hold, cheek pressed steady to the stock, and prepared to fire. Her finger rested on the trigger. Light, but certain. The scout hauled himself upward, one hand finding purchase, one boot scraping for grip. His head turned slightly, eyes narrowing against the rain. For a moment she thought he saw her. She did not flinch. She waited, still as stone, letting the gale scream above her. The sea crashed below, a wave exploding against the base of the cliffs. The sound tore through the night, masking everything else. In that instant of cover, she pressed. The rifle recoiled into her shoulder, its report lost to the thunder in the sea. The shot curved with the wind, riding the storm rather than fighting it. Through the scope, she saw the impact. The scout jerked once, then fell backward, arms flailing as he tumbled down the slope. His body struck rock, vanished into haze, and was gone. The storm swallowed him whole, indifferent to his death, indifferent to her survival. Talia kept her cheek to the stock, breathing steady. She did not move, did not celebrate. The shot had not been hers alone. It had belonged to the storm, timed with its heartbeat, hidden by its roar. She had only surrendered, aligning her will to its rhythm, letting it guide her. The cliffs fell silent except for the storm itself. Rain hammered, wind screamed, waves shattered against stone. Nothing else stirred. The patrol was broken. The storm raged on. The cliffs lay empty now. The scouts were gone, broken by fear and silence, scattered by a force they could never name. Talia remained pressed into the mud, her rifle heavy beside her, the cloak plastered across her body. She did not rise. The storm had not ended, and she knew it never would for her. Rain poured in endless rhythm, striking her hood, rolling down her cheek, dripping into the scope that no longer mattered. The wind tore at her cloak, fluttering it like seaweed caught on stone, but she held still. Each gust threatened to expose her, yet each gust also disguised her breathing. She belonged to the cliff now, half swallowed by earth, half bound to the storm. The sea below thundered, wave after wave slamming into the rock, carrying the same violence as before. Nothing in the water's rhythm cared for the bodies lost in it or the duty fulfilled above it. Nature was whole in its indifference. Talia felt the truth settle into her chest. She had survived the night not by defeating the storm, but by surrendering to its rhythm. Survival was endurance, not conquest. When dawn came, it was no triumph. A pale light split the gray sky, fragile but persistent, cutting through the haze in narrow beams. The cliffs glistened with runoff, rivulets pouring toward the sea in endless channels. Her cloak shifted with the wind, sodden fabric snapping weakly, no more defiant than kelp caught in tide. She stayed still, letting the light pass over her without movement. The storm had outlasted everything. The sea continued its assault, the wind continued its hunt, and Talia remained, a flicker of will hidden inside the storm's shadow, enduring because endurance was all that could be done.